So this is part 2 of calculating the review statistics, this time for when a review is updated or deleted. And this part is actually a bit harder, because keep in mind that a review is updated or deleted using find by ID and update, or also find by ID and and delete, right? And so for these, we do actually not have document middleware, but only query middleware, okay? And so in the query, we actually don't have direct access to the document in order to then do something similar to this, okay? Because remember, we need access to the current review so that from there we can extract the tour ID and then calculate the statistics from there, right? But again, for these hooks here, we only have query middleware, okay? But let me now show you a nice trick to actually go around this limitation. So we're going to implement a pre-middleware for these hooks, for these events basically. So pre, and then again I'm going to use a regular expression for a string starting with find one and that's it, okay? And so this one is then going to work for find one and update and find one and delete. Because remember that behind the scenes, find by ID and update is only just a shorthand for find one and update with the current ID, right? So here we actually need to use the find one and delete and find one and update middleware hooks, all right? So function, and it gets the next keyword because it's pre-middleware. So remember that the goal is to get access to the current review document, okay? But here the this keyword is the current query. Now, how are we going to go around this? Well, we can basically execute the query and then that will give us the document that's currently being processed. So in order to do that, we can use find one. And that's it. So then all we need to do is to await this query and then save it somewhere. So let's call it R, which is going to stand for review. Okay, then save it as async. And that's it. And just to make sure that this works here, let's for now just log this to the console. Okay, so without doing any calculations, all we're really interested in is to see if this nice trick here works. So basically the trick of going around that in a query middleware, we only have access to the query, okay? So again, we need to get access to the document, and so we basically execute this query by using find one. All right? So let's update a review, okay? And so let's actually update the last one that we did. All right, and the rating, yeah, let's actually set it to 4. So it was 5 before, and so now we are changing it to 4. So let's send that, and here is the review. Now, of course, the rating is still set to 5 at this point, because this find one here really gets the document from the database. And so at this point of time, in pre, it still didn't persist any changes to the database. And so it was 5 before, and so now it's still going to be 5. But that doesn't really matter here, because all we are interested in is this ID, actually this tour ID, right? Because that is what we're going to need in order to calculate the average ratings. Okay, and so now let's actually use that function. Okay, now let's think about this, because if we were to use this calc average ratings function at this point in time, then we would calculate the statistics using the non-updated data. Okay, and so that's the exact same reason why up here we also needed to use post and not pre. Okay, because only after the document is already saved to the database, it makes sense to then calculate the ratings. And so here it's the exact same thing, with the big difference that we cannot simply change this pre to post. So we cannot do that because at this point in time, we no longer have access to the query because the query has already executed, right? And so without the query, we cannot save the review document and we can then not run this function. So this is really confusing, I understand, but I really decided to create this lecture in this way because, well, it's really the only solution around this problem. And it's a really great exercise for you to basically understand this life cycle. So the solution for this is to now use post. So review schema, and then basically the same. So let's just copy all of this, make our lives a bit easier, get rid of this, and get rid of the next. Here we also need to call next, okay? But then we do it post, okay? And so now this point in time, so after the query has already finished, and so therefore the review has been updated, this is a perfect point in time where we can then call this function. So calculate average ratings. But where do we now get the tour ID from? Well, we're gonna have to use a trick, which is basically to pass data from the pre-middleware to the post-middleware. And so instead of saving this document to a simple variable, we're gonna save it to this.r. Okay, so basically we create a property on the this variable. Okay, and so now here we still have access to that. And so now we can say this.r, which remember is the review, and then .tour. So this is again quite confusing, but again also quite fun once you understand how this really works. Okay? Now, again, we need something like this here in order to actually call this function here, because remember that this in fact is a static method. Okay, and so we need to call it on the model. Now, where is this model in this case? Well, it's at this.r, which is in this case equivalent to this here in this middleware, dot constructor dot calc average ratings. Woo, that looks quite overwhelming, doesn't it? Of course, we have to await it, so that's why we declared this as async. Okay, so again, we basically used this way here of passing the data from the pre-middleware to the post-middleware. And so then here we retrieve the review document from the this variable. Okay, and again, we did have to do it in this way because at this point in time here, the query was already executed. And so we could not do this here. And let's actually write that down. Does not work here. The query has already executed. Great. And with this, we should now actually be ready to test this. So let's go ahead and update this one here once more and set it to a rating of 1. All right. Let's now take a look here. And so you see that the number of ratings is still 5, but the average is now only 3. And now the question is if this really updated also on the tour. And yep, indeed it did. So 5 ratings with an average of 3. Great. Let's now update another one. So in order to do that, let's get all our reviews. And actually, we do not want all of them, but only the last one. And here I still have this filter, so I should get rid of that. So we get all 65 results. So all of these reviews, but we only want the last ones, so the ones that we just created. So let's update. I'm not sure, because actually they're not in order here. Let's okay, so here we have the most recent ones. Okay, so let me now update this one here to, let's say, 4. Just as a final test. And so that should bring the average up a little bit. And indeed it did. So 3.6 now, and of course the number is still 5 because we didn't add a new review. So it works great on update. Let's now actually also test it with deleting. So let's go ahead and delete the review that we just updated. And so now we should be down to only 4. And indeed, here we are. So now only 4. And let's actually delete all of them. So this one is next. Here we are. Then also this one. So now we should be down to 3 only. Or actually, we are only just have 2 left with an average of 4. So let's see which one we have still left. So it's this one with 3 and this one with 5. And so that's why we have this average of 4. So let's get rid of this one. And so now our average should be 5, right? Or actually 3, because the only one that's left has 3. And now the final test, deleting the last one, just to see what's going to happen once we do that. And we get an error here, so cannot read property and rating of undefined. So that's in calc average ratings at line number 69. So don't know what this is. So line 69, and so it's this problem here. So we're trying to read n rating of undefined. So stats 0 is basically undefined. And that's because if there are no document matching this query here basically, well, then we simply get back an empty array. And so that's actually exactly what we have down here. So this is the stats array. And so right now it doesn't have any results. Okay, so we should only execute this piece of code here whenever we actually do have something in the stats array. So let's do that. So if stats.length is greater than 0, well, then do this. And if not, well, basically that means that all our reviews are gone. Well, then we basically want to go back to the defaults. And so we're going to set it then to the quantity of 0 and the average of 4.5, which remember is the default when there are no reviews at all. Okay, so let's quickly create a new review, and it can be this. All right, so we're back to having 1 rating, and now delete it right away just to test that piece of code we just wrote. Just to see it here as well. So 1 rating, average 5. And now when we delete it, we no longer get an error. And on our tour, we are back to 0 and the default of 4.5. All right. Perfect. So let's again take just a quick second here to recap what we just did. So in order to be able to run this function here also on update and on delete, we actually need to use the query middleware that Mongoose gives us for these situations. Okay, so we do not have a handy document middleware which works for these functions, but instead we need to use the query middleware. And in that one, we do not directly have access to the current document. And so we need to go around that by using this find one here, and so basically retrieving the current document from the database. We then store it on the current query variable, and so that's this. And by doing that, we then get access to it in the post middleware. And it's then only in that post middleware where we actually calculate the statistics for reviews. And remember that we do it this way because if we did it right in this middleware function, then the underlying data would not have been updated at that point. And so the calculated statistics would not really be up to date. And so that's why we used this two-step process here basically. Now let's get rid of this console.log here. since we're finished now, and also of these statistics. So, I hope that this was fun to you and not all too overwhelming. I designed this exercise specifically so that we could solve a real-world business problem by using all the tools that Mongoose gives us. And so with that, I hope that you learned a bit better how to work with all these different middlewares in different situations whenever needed in a real-world situation. So great job for finishing this quite challenging lecture and for still being with me at this point of the course. That's really good for me to see, so I'm really happy about that. But anyway, there's still some more great content coming up in this section actually, and so let's now move on together right to the next video.